everyone, and welcome to the lecture on the Introduction to the Proposal paper and how to develop a working thesis. In this lecture, I'll be discussing what a proposal is, why we're writing it, and what its basic parts are. Next week, I'll be walking through the proposal step by step, but this week we will focus on the importance of audience, how to ask questions in the proposal, and developing a working thesis. Let's start by asking the question, why a proposal? The proposal is a place to help you articulate your ideas for the final project. It is, according to your textbook, a formal plan that outlines your objectives for conducting a research project, specifies the methods you intend to use, and describes the implications of your work. So in our particular proposal, we're going to be focusing on the research project that you'll be doing for the rest of the semester. You will explain why your topic matters, you can ask questions that you want to answer during research, and you will create a working thesis sentence. The goal of the proposal is to help you clarify your ideas before you begin creating the final project. Once you finish the proposal, you should have a clear direction for the rest of the semester. So in this way, you can almost think of a proposal as your overview and your research plan for what you're going to actually do for the project. So by the time you're done with the proposal, you should have a very clear direction and a good idea of what you plan to research and then how you're going to proceed. What does a proposal look like? Well, there are several different parts of a proposal, and your textbook explains that typically a research proposal should include 4 sections: the introduction, which encompasses the purpose, a review of relevant research, a method, and the implications for research. What we're going to do for our class is to follow a similar style that includes several of the same areas, but we're going to modify it for our purposes for the research project. So we will still have the introduction, but we're going to be discussing it in terms of a rationale. This will be your reasons for writing, which is similar to your purpose. Then you'll have 2 sections that talk about 2 different aspects related to your final project. The first will include the body, which is the method, and then the next one is the body, but it also focuses more on the artifact that you're going to create. If you don't remember about the artifact, you may want to look back at the research project overview sheet and refresh your memory about that. Then finally, the conclusion will be the implications and include your working thesis. And then instead of having a review of relevant research like the textbook indicates, what we're going to do is include those potential sources that you've already located. And you're going to continue to add to those sources as you develop your topic, but you'll want to go ahead and use the ones that you already found. Next week, we'll walk through writing each of these parts step by step, so you can look for that lecture coming up. For this week, I'm going to ask you to follow along with my lecture and do a couple of embedded assignments. Making these notes now will help you develop the body of the proposal later. So I ask that you go ahead and open up a document on your computer or take out a sheet of paper, and then when I instruct you, you can pause the lecture and then go ahead and do these assignments that are embedded. Keep those notes, and then as you refer back to them, you'll find that you have the materials that you need to write the proposal next week when we go through the step-by-step process. So first, let's talk about the importance of audience. Writing a proposal will help you think through your potential audience. So now you are the creator. That means you have to think about who you are trying to persuade. So you want to also think about what you're going to do in order to persuade people with their rhetorical appeals, as well as how they might potentially interpret you and what you're going to say and how it will be interpreted by others. So you need to already be considering what others have said about your topic in order for you to then think about how you want to narrow your audience or perhaps broaden it in order to reach the most people. So for now, I'd like you to start by writing a short paragraph about the audience for your final project. Who would be interested in what you're writing about? And try to be specific about this. You can think in terms of demographics, perhaps college students or children, older people or teenagers. You can think about it in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of region, different global areas of the world, right? Think about all the different categories that people may fall into and who would be the most interested in your topic. Then you want to think about, what do you already know about your topic? What is the current conversation, and what do people typically think about your topic? So obviously you may have conducted some basic research to gather a couple of sources at this point, but you want to be thinking in terms of the general conversation, particularly in terms of pop culture. What are those things that people already know or already assume? And how do you think the conversation is represented in culture at large? So take a few minutes to write about that as well. Then you also want to consider what will you add to this conversation that is new or interesting. You want to give your own perspective on what's being said, and you want to think about how that perspective will impact your audience that you've identified. So what are you going to add that is new, and who is going to listen to that particular argument? So take a few minutes to write that, and you may want to pause the lecture now in order to do that. The proposal is also a place for you to ask questions. You're really supposed to be exploring ideas at this point, making up hypotheses, and really thinking through what you want to look at. So the proposal itself can contain research questions that you make up. These are questions that you want to answer during the research process, but you do not have the answer to yet. So it's perfectly fine for you to include questions that you want to investigate within the proposal. So now I'd like you to think about things that you want to learn and to take a moment to write out at least 3 questions related to your topic. The questions should be complex and they should lead to research, and I have an example here. If my topic was drug use in film, my social issue being drug use, my pop culture form being film, then I could ask a question, what is the effect of drug use in film on viewers? Or, does including drug use in a film make it more popular? So these are questions that I don't know the answer to now, but I'm curious about. I want to find out more about those things during the research process. And those questions may remain unanswered. Maybe my research takes me in a different direction and I don't ever find out that answer. That's perfectly fine. The goal of the proposal is to get you thinking. So in order to get you thinking, you need to be thinking about that audience and thinking about what you can contribute to the conversation, and then writing questions that you want to figure out answers to during the research process. Those questions can help guide you and focus your research a little bit more. So go ahead and take a moment now to pause the lecture again and to write out a few questions that you're interested in related to your topic, ones that you may want to try to answer or ones that could at least focus your research as you begin. An important part of the proposal is developing a rationale for your research. The proposal's goal is to explain why you chose your topic and why you will create a certain type of artifact. So in order to do the why, you have to think about that yourself on 2 different levels. You can use the personal level or the professional level, or you can use both. Really, either one of those is fine, and you can use I in your writing for the proposal. So I have an example here. If my topic was superhero films, then I would want to talk about why I enjoyed writing about them or why I wanted to write more about them and research and learn about them. So I have a personal example. I chose to write about superhero films because watching them is my favorite pop culture activity. So that's on the personal level. But if I wanted to connect this to a future job, I could also talk about how I'm planning to become a screenwriter, and I could discuss the professional reasons for conducting research. Or I could use both of those things together in my essay. So think through what your rationale is for choosing this particular topic, whether it's going to be personal or professional or both. You should also, in the proposal, be explaining why you think the artifact that you will create will be the best contribution to the conversation on your topic. So remember, if you've forgotten, again, go back to the research project overview sheet and remind yourself that you will be creating a visual artifact or an auditory artifact if you want to focus more on music, and you're going to incorporate that into your writing, making your project a multimodal project. In the proposal, you need to explain what type of artifact you're creating and why you chose that particular type. So to continue with my superhero angle, I have an example. I chose to create a collage in order to show the wide variety of images that use superheroes in marketing films to teenagers. The multiple images will capture the patterns in marketing that are often overlooked in the current conversation on my topic. So you can hear there embedded a little bit of a thesis that I'm trying to show something that has been missing, and that is my contribution to the topic at large. So in your proposal, you will be developing these ideas or reasons why you are focusing on this topic and why you are creating a certain type of project. So now's another chance for you to think through these questions. I'd like you to pause the lecture here and write a short paragraph answering these questions. Why did you choose your topic? What type of artifact will you create? Why will that type of artifact be the best choice? And I realize that you may not have all of those answers right now, but this is that moment when it's a good time to start thinking through them. Next week, we're going to be focusing on writing about the answers to these questions, and you already need to have those answers. So this week, spend time coming up with those answers, thinking through your choices, deciding on the type of artifact that you want to create, maybe narrowing it or thinking through maybe 3 different types of artifacts that you're interested in, and then weighing out the pros and cons of each one, and then deciding on a final topic. So go ahead and spend some time now thinking through those and developing the beginnings of a rationale. The proposal will also contain a working thesis. Remember, the thesis is for the final project, and that your project is going to explore the history, the current trends of your issue, but eventually it's also going to make an argument. You won't just be repeating other people's information, but you're going to add your own perspective to it. Your textbook says a thesis encompasses all of the information writers use to further their arguments. It is not simply a single assertion at the beginning of the essay. What we're going to do is develop a working thesis now, because it will help guide your research for the rest of the semester, and eventually that thesis will hold all the information together: history, trends, your artifact, and your conclusions and implications. All of the information that you want to create will all be connected by this main idea. So let's talk about a couple of thesis myths first. It is a myth that you come up with a thesis before conducting research. We are doing that now, but it's not our final thesis. Instead, you will develop your final thesis during research. So the working thesis and the final thesis are 2 different things, and I'm going to talk about those 2 different things on the next slide. But for now, remember that it's also a myth that the thesis must be 1 sentence. Instead, it's usually at least 2 sentences, and sometimes it's a whole paragraph. So don't feel like you have to focus on a final thesis for the proposal, and don't feel like you have to jam it all into 1 sentence. Instead, you're basically creating a hypothesis. You're creating a thesis that you think is going to work, and then you're going to do the research and see if it does work. And it may be something that is a little more complex and involves a little bit more writing rather than just 1 sentence. Let's look at the difference between the 2 types of theses. Your textbook describes them as working versus definitive theses, but I may also refer to them as a final thesis, meaning the final version. You should write a working thesis before research. That's what we're doing now. A working thesis is your first attempt at an assertion of your position. It helps you read selectively while gathering sources. This way you're not having to do research that involves every single aspect of your topic. It gives you a way to narrow down your focus so that your research is more productive. The working thesis also should not be viewed as your final idea for your project. It can and probably will evolve, and that is completely fine. So what you put into the proposal is tentative, it's working, it's malleable, you're able to change it. And then when you get to the final version of the final project, you have your definitive thesis. That one's not changing because you've completed the project. You know what you're saying at that point. So the working thesis belongs in the proposal paper, which is an inquisitive document that's helping you get ideas for your project, while the definitive thesis belongs in the final paper. A definitive thesis is written during the drafting phase of the paper, when all research is already concluded. It represents a much more complex position because it takes into account everything that you've read and everything that you've created. It normally occurs in the introduction of the research paper, and it acts as a thread that holds the paper together. So even though I've indicated that your argument for the research project will come a little towards the second half and more towards the conclusion when you're discussing your implications, you're still going to have the main idea of what you're pushing towards and what you're trying to persuade people to in the opening of the paper and running as a thread throughout all of the final paper. So that thesis again is definitive, meaning it's not going to change, while the working thesis in the proposal is allowed to be adapted throughout the research project. Now we're going to look a little more specifically at the types of working thesis models described in your textbook. It would be good for you to have read that section of the textbook if you haven't already, so you may want to pause the lecture and open up the book and make sure you have that nearby. We're looking at 3 of the 4 models that your textbook proposes, and we're going to use those models as you try to develop a working thesis this week in your discussions. So the first model that we'll look at is the correcting misinterpretations model. It starts with the question, what do most people assume about your topic, and why are they wrong? So if you agree with everybody on your topic, this is probably not the model that you want to use. You want to use this model if you see something that you think people have gotten wrong and you want to correct that misinterpretation, you want to change the opinion about it, and your thesis is going to answer that question. Usually it sounds something like, although we typically think blank, and you describe the typical point of view, further research shows blank, meaning here's how I'm correcting what people usually think through this research process that I've done. You want to use this thesis if you definitely feel that you have something to say that can correct people's ideas. A different version of that is the filling the gap model. Here you're going to focus more on what has been ignored or what has been missing rather than what people have gotten wrong. So what appears to be the case but might actually be different if we examine it more closely and figure out what has been missing. What has been previously ignored? These are the questions, if they interest you, that model is probably going to be the one that you want to use. Your thesis would answer the questions by using phrasing that's something like this. Most research has focused on blank, but my paper will show blank. So you can see how this is similar to the correcting misinterpretations model, but instead of pointing out how everyone is wrong, you're pointing out a different perspective or what has been missing or ignored or overlooked. So you want to think in terms of filling the gap, meaning filling in the blank in the conversation that people are having about your topic. The third type of model that we'll be looking at is the modification model. You'll want to use this model if you feel like you agree with most of the research out there. Perhaps you don't see anything that's missing or overlooked, and you don't really see anything that can be corrected in terms of misinterpretations. So if you already agree with what's mostly being said and all of the assumptions, you need to think about what you can add in order to point people to what could be next. So what is the next step in solving perhaps a particular problem with your topic? How can you expand the topic to provide more diversity? Your thesis would answer these questions, and usually it sounds like, I agree with others that blank. So you're going to kind of sum up what your agreement is at that point, what you already feel like the conversation gets right. However, the next step for this issue is that we should blank, and you're going to offer the next step or the next perspective that can move the conversation forward into the future. So you want to use this thesis to build on others' ideas and to propose future ideas or changes. So it is slightly similar again to the previous 2 models, and then it adds rather than correcting, or it adds rather than filling in a blank. So it's looking more towards the future rather than correcting the current conversation. You can also note that your textbook includes a hypothesis testing model, but we're not going to be using that particular model in this course. You may find that you are blending the 3 types of models as you go forward, and that's fine. But for this week, when we're working on building a thesis, I want you to try out all 3 models to see which one works best with your topic. So you may want to go ahead and pause the lecture now and test out these 3 different models, filling in those blanks and then adding the words that you feel like makes that thesis model your own. You will be posting those into the discussion this week, so now's a good time for you to go ahead and test those out. What you may notice as you start working on your thesis sentences is that even though the models can seem a little bit similar, when you start to make them your own rather than just filling in the blanks that I've provided, they can lead to different areas of research. So I've given some examples on this slide using the topic of economics in film. So the correcting misinterpretations model reads as, although most people assume that popular films do not address economic inequality, I will show that many films use this issue as a point of conflict and, surprisingly, as a source of entertainment. So you can hear there that I'm correcting the misinterpretations. Most people think this, but I'm going to show this other perspective, and I'm going to change the conversation that's happening. The filling the gap model is a little bit different. Most research on economics in film has focused on the negative portrayals of poverty, but my project will show how the portrayal of wealth is also problematic for viewers. So here, what I'm saying is there's something that's been missing in the current research. Research has focused just on poverty. I'm going to focus on wealth instead. It's similar to correcting misinterpretations, but it's less concerned with overturning the results of the research about negative portrayals of poverty and more interested in adding something that's been missing, right? Filling that gap. The final one is the modification model. I agree with other researchers that the portrayal of economics in film has had a harmful effect on viewers' sense of self-worth. The next step for this issue is for screenwriters and directors to create more positive representations of economic security in their films. So here I'm trying to propose a solution to a problem that I see. So other researchers and I agree. There is this issue that viewing films with negative economic portrayals hurts people's sense of self-worth after they watch the film. So my solution to that is to propose that the entertainment community actually address this on the level of creation, right? Screenwriting, directing, creating those films should be different. That's my personal contribution that other researchers perhaps have not said yet. So each of these would focus me a little bit differently on what types of sources I want to use in the essay. And they would also focus on what types of different artifacts that I might create in order to compose a solution. I would probably pick an artifact that is showing different types of films and then showing potential films or potential examples of films that might be different. If I'm filling the gap, I might show screen stills from negative portrayals of poverty, but then also put screen stills of the portrayal of wealth. So the artifacts there might be incredibly different in terms of the imagery that is being presented. So I want you to be thinking about how you can take these formulas, interpret them, and make them your own for your particular project, and then see what direction you want to go. After you have those 3 variations of your possible working thesis, you can decide on which one you actually want to pursue. Which one will best answer your research questions, which one will generate an artifact that is interesting to you and that makes you want to put that into your project. So be thinking about these things this week as you're developing those working thesis sentences and participating in the discussion. Thanks.